This is The Energy Show with REI Energy. Energize your investments and maximize your tax deductions. Here's Mike Mauceli.
Hey, my name is Mike Mauceli, and this is The Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be talking about Israel, war, and oil, and you're going to discover how oil and gas will be impacted by the Israeli war. Jim Krane is my guest. Jim, nice to have you on today.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Appreciate being here.
Can you give our listeners a little bit of your background?
Oh, sure. Yes. So I am a research fellow at the Baker Institute at Rice University. So a think tank started by former Secretary of State Baker back in the 90s. I've been here for about 10 years. I am a former journalist, used to work in the Middle East, and that's what I cover from an energy standpoint now. Worked in Iraq and in Dubai, spent time in Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. And did a PhD after leaving journalism on energy consumption in that region. And that's kind of what I do here at the Baker Institute, looking at energy supply and demand issues in that region.
Well, there's a lot to unpack today, I guess, and, with the war going on in Israel. And, what I really wanted to kind of dive into, though, was, how is this impacting the Middle East, this war that's going on in Israel and Gaza now?
Yeah, well, there's a ton to unpack on this thing, right? So, so there's direct effects and there's indirect effects, and then there's the things that we worry about, right? That could happen and get really bad. So, if I could start, maybe let me just kick off a few of the direct effects, right? So, Chevron operates two really big gas fields offshore of Israel, right? Tamar and Leviathan. And one of those operating platforms for the Tamar field is actually pretty close to Gaza, not very far offshore there of Gaza. So Israel has ordered Chevron to shut in production there. And they've said that they've intercepted various vessels laden with explosives and shot down some rockets that look like they might have been heading towards that platform. So that's still shut in today. It's unclear when it's going to restart. But it's not a ton of gas from there, but it's enough to be causing some problems around the region. And the effects of that are cascading all the way to Europe. So a lot of that gas from that platform was flowing to Egypt. There's a pipeline, the EMG pipeline, right offshore, actually, of Gaza. It goes through Gaza waters. And that pipe has also been shut down. So it was taking, somewhere around about a half of a BCF a day to Egypt. And now, Israel is still exporting a little bit of gas to Egypt, but it's going in a very circuitous route up through Jordan, down, then across the Gulf at the bottom, and then back into the Sinai from there. So there's still some gas getting from Egypt into Israel, but it's about 20% of what it was before the war started. And that could go down to zero. Jordan is still taking that gas, but as you might imagine, they're not too happy with the Israelis right now and the way they're bombing Gaza and killing so many civilians. So it's possible that flow could also stop.
I see. So, since part of that gas does go to Egypt, can't Egypt and those countries put pressure on, Hamas and some of these other groups that are on the border?
It might be a little too late for that. That would have been probably helpful before October 7th, but now the only, the Israelis are the ones that need to have pressure put on them to rein things in, really. Otherwise, it's going to, who knows what will happen. But
go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say, inside Egypt, there are some issues with, as Egypt has made some really big gas discoveries recently, and they also have built a ton of gas-fired power plants. Electricity demand's been going up, and they've been trying to meet that demand with their own gas, but they've had some problems. Their biggest field, so production is kind of surprisingly, been lax. It's been faltering. They've been having some technical issues there, and they also had a record, temperatures this summer. Like most, lots of other places. So they had a lot of power outages. Egypt's got 2 LNG export terminals that have been there for a long time. They're kind of underutilized. And that's kind of what Israel was trying to do, was push their gas out to the world market as LNG, using the spare capacity in those Egyptian terminals. But now Egypt needs that gas for their own purposes. So they haven't been exporting much LNG. I think there's been some tankers sitting at anchor waiting for cargoes, and there should have been 5 shipped out by now, and there's only been 1. And so power cuts are happening again in Egypt, and then Europe's not getting the LNG it needs. So
you haven't heard much out of Saudi Arabia. I mean, as far as what's going on in the Middle East, I know I saw, I guess, Jared Kushner over the weekend. He was on one of the TV shows, and he was talking about the Abraham Accord and how Saudi Arabia was still interested in joining that, and kind of bringing the Middle East together. And now you've got Iran that is funding this terrorist organizations. I mean, what do the Saudis think about all this?
Yeah, I was the Saudis and everybody else in the Gulf is aghast, of course, right? So yeah, I mean, it's true. So they were on the cusp, seemingly on the cusp of normalization, right? I mean, it seemed like all sorts of issues were getting thrown into those talks. It was getting a little bit unmanageable anyway. But I mean, I think the Saudis made pretty clear that their strategic interests were in favor of normalization with Israel. There was the benefits for them were clear, and that they that their national interests were pushing them to go for it. So that's still the case, right? As that's probably what Kushner was referring to. However, they cannot do that with their own people. The public in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf is just they're in just really upset. There's a huge public backlash going on right now. I mean, I lived in the Gulf during a previous Israeli bombing assault on Gaza, and it was just in your face all the time, on the news, in the papers. Every time you went to the supermarket or the mall or whatever, there were collection boxes, people gathering donations, people bringing camping gear, tents, canned goods. I mean, it's the solidarity with the Palestinians is still extremely high in those countries. So even if the rulers and the elites in these countries want to sort of normalize relations with Israel, there's no way they can. Their publics are just not going to stand for it. So it's off the table, I think, for a while.
Let's see. Is OPEC going to stay together? After all of this.
Yeah, I mean, OPEC is, I mean, they seem to be the one group that seems to have solved the collective action problem, right? I mean, those guys are, I mean, I think, there's chafing, right? We just wrote a paper about looking at the pros and cons of the UAE leaving OPEC, and we were arguing that, hey, the UAE probably be better off outside OPEC.
Yeah, I read that paper that you wrote, and it's a good article as far as on that. And I guess a lot of these OPEC countries now, with Russia involved and kind of OPEC plus, I mean, they're getting squeezed on on all these production cuts and in the UAE. And is it better for them to leave OPEC or?
Yeah, I mean, it is in terms of revenue, right? I mean, they're leaving so much money on the table. They've got about a quarter of their production capacity shut in, so way more proportionally than anybody else. They've been investing, so they were at about 3 million barrels a day, for a long time, and they're pushing to go to 5 million barrels a day by 2027, and they're at about 4 now, or just over. But I think the production's still under 3, somewhere to 2.9-ish or something. But yeah, so they're they're leaving a lot of money on the table. However, there wouldn't be they do get some benefits from being in OPEC, and they're wouldn't be pain free leaving. I'm sure the Saudis would have something to say about it.
Well, now you have you have Russia, and of course now you've got China, and you've got Iran that are kind of forming a pack, I guess, to basically create a lot of this terror that's going on. I mean, I don't know if China is actually in the background, or I know Russia probably is because of the war in Ukraine, and to create instability. But I mean, is the reason why Iran is able to fund a lot of these groups now because they're selling more oil?
Well, I've never heard that Russia or China was funding Hamas. I've never heard that. But Iran, yeah, I mean, they are certainly funding the various groups around the region, Hezbollah and Hamas. But it's a complicated issue. It's got a political office in Qatar, right? And you can fly in there and have a meeting with Hamas in Doha, which is a U.S. ally, has a U.S. military base. A really big one. Our biggest base in the Middle East is there. So it gets complicated. And also the Israelis were trying to divide the Palestinians by allowing those funds to go to Hamas. So that's part of Netanyahu's policies were to hey, let's allow Hamas to grow more powerful in Gaza so that we can't make peace with them, and we're never going to have this two-state solution. I think Netanyahu's dedicated his career to making sure there's not going to be a Palestinian state. So that's another reason that we're having this blow up. You've got these people essentially living in a prison camp who are are getting funds from various quarters with Israeli, at least acquiescence. So, it's a very complicated situation. But I think the folks in the Gulf, Saudis, the UAE is about to host the COP28. I mean, they're going to have the eyes of the world on them here in, a month or less. So they do not want to see an escalation. I think those countries are desperate. And you're seeing that the Saudis have met with the Saudi leader and the Iranian leader have met. I mean, this is driving them together to make common cause to try and reduce the tensions in the region, from their publics, but also from an escalating war. So I think the mantra in the Gulf is not to cause trouble. The mantra is to get this thing to calm down.
No, I'm sure that's in the best interest of everyone to do that, around the world, because obviously that's one of the largest producing packs where most of our energy comes from, worldwide, is from the Middle East. And even though we've been able to, produce more oil here in the United States, and we don't import as much as we once did, from those countries, I mean, it is still a powder keg over there, right?
Yeah, and they're responsible for the prices here at our local gas stations, right? I mean, even though we're exporting actually a record amount, I just saw of crude oil this month, we are still, oil prices, gasoline prices are not formed in the United States. They're formed on a global market. And though, the Saudis and the other big exporters in the Persian Gulf, they are the biggest source of supply into that global market, and that's where the prices are formed. So if there's a problem there, it affects us right away.
Yeah, I guess a lot of this started about 50 years ago, right? When the Israel triggered the gas crisis here in the United States. And what lessons can we take from that?
Yeah, we just had a conference on that. We spent over half a day talking about it. We had Prince Turki of Saudi Arabia coming over here and, gave some of his personal remarks about that time and now. And it is very interesting. Yeah, 50 years, almost to the day, We've got another Middle East war that's also, it's not this time around, we're not seeing deliberate oil market reactions. So it is different. But it was a secret attack on Israel, done in secret. Last time it was by two countries, Syria and Egypt, trying to get their territory back that Israel had captured. This time around, it was by a kind of non-state group. But we still saw lots of potential for escalation. But thankfully this time it really has mostly stayed out of energy markets, especially the oil market. It's done, created some havoc, as I was talking about, in the gas market, but oil markets not so much. But still, one of those things is, it's that as much as we try to remove ourselves from the Middle East, I mean, the past three presidents have been doing their best to try and get us unstuck from that region. It keeps pulling us back in. And, one of the lessons from our event was that, until we find a solution for, what's going on between Israel and the Palestinians, we are going to keep getting dragged in, and this thing is going to keep blowing up until we can figure that out. Hopefully some kind of a just solution that the Palestinians can live with and the Israelis can live with. So, until that happens, I think you can expect this kind of stuff periodically.
Yeah. No, especially with all of the indoctrination that's been going on around the country, and of course in Palestine. I mean, I've been reading quite a bit about that now that, there's a lot of, I guess, another generation coming up that obviously, until, like you said, something changes, I mean, a lot of that indoctrination is going to continue. And so there's going to continue to be political unrest in those regions. And I also read that, oh, go ahead.
I mean, I was going to say it's not. I mean, you don't have to be indoctrinated if you're living under a hostile rule and you don't have your rights and you can't aspire to having a career or a normal life. I don't think you need to be indoctrinated to have a problem with that. So
yeah, I agree. I also read that Biden was, I don't know has he started sanctioning Iran oil or.
So that's another wild card here. Yeah. So, so we have sanctions on Iran. Biden's been kind of looking the other way and allowing that Iranian oil to, a lot more of it to start flowing back out to world markets, partially because the Saudis haven't been so friendly. Normally, we used to be able to count on them to bring their spare production capacity online when oil prices were high. And, since Biden's gotten in office, he's had a hard time convincing them for a number of reasons, right? And some of them, potentially justified, from the Saudi side. But anyway, so he's been looking for new sources of spare oil production capacity, and one way that, kind of a unique way is to, hey, let's selectively enforce sanctions on Iran and maybe also on Venezuela. Keep the sanctions there. We don't have to have an agreement with them. We'll just maybe back away from those sanctions and let them sell the oil, hopefully at a discount so they won't earn so much, but at least bring this extra supply to the market. Similar approach with Russia, the price cap, that it was working for a while, but, seems to be being ignored now. But it's supply that the market needs. It keeps gasoline prices down in the U.S., and it doesn't require us to have a really, to go through the process of having a negotiated settlement with these parties. So, but now that that since the Hamas attack, Iran funding them, it's going to be hard to relax sanctions on Iran. So. Biden's in a quandary now. I mean, do we want to reimpose those sanctions and push up gasoline prices on Americans, or do we keep looking the other way? So he's in a tight spot on that one.
Do you have any thoughts on? I know that Saudi Arabia, they've been very secretive about what their reserves are, always have been, and a lot of the other OPEC countries. But we all know that there's depletion oil and gas wells. I mean, is there any idea, or do you have any thoughts on, or are the Saudis reserve? Well, we know they're depleting, but I mean, how much reserves they have left?
Yeah, so they floated shares of Saudi Aramco on their local exchange there, and they've also been in the bond markets.
Right.
So they've had to release a couple of prospectuses, right? So one for the IPO a couple of years ago, and one in 2019 for their bond sale, the international bond sale. I think it was done in London. So there was a whole bunch of documentation required for that, including an audit of their reserves, which I read with great interest because I have, some similar, concerns as lots of folks do, right, about their reserves. And the reserve statements I read looked pretty thorough, they were actually pretty. I was pretty reassured by reading them. It also mentioned that, Saudi Aramco has got, up to another 100 years of exclusive access to that. I think they, I didn't even realize they had an official concession from the Saudi government, but they do. So they are, you can sort of see, given the size of the reserves and the importance of those oil rents to the Saudi state. That they're going to want that to continue, and they're going to want people to maintain confidence in their ability to continue producing, because that underpins their government and their stability there. So I think they were. So I'm fairly I'm not too suspicious of it or anything.
I know they've been trying to obviously use a lot of their oil money to redevelop not redevelop their country, but shift in a lot of ways to be more of a I guess friendlier country, which under the new president, obviously they've done a lot of good things as far as to allow women to drive and and stuff like that. So Saudi Arabia to me seems like they would like to have peace in the Middle East and for all of the OPEC countries to get along, because I think their agenda, of course, is continue to bring in more Western influence into the Middle East. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, so the Saudis have been changing very quickly. So since the death of King Abdullah in 2015, there have been just an array of really quick and pretty deep changes. So, it's still just as autocratic as it used to be. You can't vote. There's no political parties. You can't really express opposition to the ruling family. Freedom, speech is being cracked down on. Probably even more vehemently than it was. But on the flip, a lot more social freedoms than you used to have, and they're even, as you mentioned, women driving. When they lifted the ban on women driving. The first couple of times I visited, you still didn't really see many women driving. But this year when I was back, lots of women all over the place. And it had, the traffic in Riyadh is just getting absolutely horrible. So I'm not sure if it's just we can pin it on the lady drivers, but that seems to be what a lot of the Saudis have been saying. Too many women driving now. But they are, you can go and eat in a restaurant now and sit wherever you want. I mean, it used to be segregated sections. If you went in as a single man, you kind of had to go sit in the back, and the families would sit in their own section where, women could be with, their husbands or, their fathers or whatever. And, I think there's still a few restaurants that do that because there's still conservative Saudis that prefer that, but you don't have to do that anymore. And you can, so you can sit where you want. There's movie theaters that are open there now. There's live music, concerts. So lots of, pretty rapid change. And there's even some talk about alcohol sales resuming, after almost 100 years. Long prohibition stint in the kingdom, and who knows? I mean, we might see that in some of the resorts. I think because they're they're trying to branch into tourism like Dubai has, and you can't really do it without alcohol. So so they're talking about that now too.
Do you think that countries like Iran, well, I know there's, was a lot of talk during the Trump administration about them trying to change the government in Iran. And of course, there's been a lot of pushback from the mullahs and those groups, as far as to keep the country under wrap. I mean, back when the Shah was in charge, I mean, did the people have more freedom back then?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a monarchy, right? But, it was from people, when I lived in Dubai, of course, there's so many Iranians in Dubai. I mean, you chat with them all the time. And there was a lot of nostalgia that I used to hear about how much better things were. These people are obviously had chosen to emigrate, but they would still go back and forth to Iran. But they were pretty upset about these really tough strictures on life, social life. I mean, they used to have, like to drink and have parties, and didn't want to dress so conservatively or go see live music or movies or whatever, and all that stuff is no longer possible. So I think there's probably still a lot of nostalgia.
Do you see people wanting to change that? I mean, the citizens.
For sure. I mean, we've seen, just mass protests and some really tough crackdowns. So it doesn't seem like, the religious authorities are ready to give up yet. But I mean, Iran's got a young, well-educated population. I mean, Iranian, you can see when they're, migrants come to the U.S. how well they do. We've had a number of them coming through here doing PhDs at Rice, and just absolutely brilliant people doing very well. It's you really you feel bad for them being bottled up in the way that they are. I think there's a lot that Americans and Iranian citizens have in common that unfortunately we're at odds with their government.
Yeah, when I was in college, some of my next door neighbors were from Iran, and they're really, really good people and very smart. And, they wanted to come here and learn, and and then go back to their country. So it's amazing how that's that these governments are able to take charge of the people and hold this power for so long.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between them and the Shah, so the Shah, one of the reasons he fell so quickly was because, the military was unwilling to shoot at its own people back then in the 70s. These days, they are. I mean, the crackdowns are much tougher. The security forces now are willing to be deadly. And so they, it's keeping the current regime in power. They're using tactics that they wouldn't do. They refused to do. Last time there was an uprising.
Well, I wanted to ask you one more question, and it had to do with the strategic oil reserves. I mean, of course, Biden has drawn that down quite a bit. I mean, how risky is that for the U.S.?
Well, so we're still a net exporter of crude. So, the main risk, to my mind, so it's about half empty now, right? And so there's still, there's way more than, we're supposed to be holding 90 days of imports in there, import equivalent. So there's way more than that. I don't see it as a threat, but, that oil would be nice to have. If prices went way up again, you'd want to have that thing full so you can give, even, if we're not going to use it for emergencies anymore, at least to use it to give drivers some relief, and send a signal to the Saudis that, hey, we wouldn't be doing this if you guys would bring on your spare production capacity. I hope that Biden can refill it, or whoever the next president probably refill that thing at a decent price. I hate to see him buying oil and refilling it now with prices the way they are now.
Yeah, $80 a barrel.
Yeah, so you want to buy low and then sell high, and you make a little money doing it, and give the U.S. motorist a a breathing room, I guess. But
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, we're not on the sort of the knife edge of, having to cover 90 days of imports anymore. So, I think, using it in a different way is probably okay. I think we're going to see other presidents from both parties probably doing the same thing with it, as long as our oil production is as high as it is.
Well, I really enjoyed having you on the show today, Jim. Can you tell our listeners how to follow you?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, so I do research here at the Baker Institute at Rice. I've got my page. So we're at, just bakerinstitute.org. And I used to be on Twitter more than I am now, but I still do go on there every once in a while. And it's just at Jim Krane, JIMKRANE. You can try that too.
Well, I know you had a book that came out in 2019. Can you tell us what the name of it is?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so a book called Energy Kingdoms. It's a book about the 6 Gulf monarchies, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the others we were talking about. It goes into Iran a bit. Looks heavily at their energy demand, their energy consumption in that region. If you didn't know it, but they're that's one of the highest consuming regions of oil and energy, and also one of the highest carbon emitting regions that we have in the world. So interesting to see how they're going to tackle the COP coming up, the climate change talks.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'd love to have you back in the future.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to The Energy Show with REI Energy. Energize your investments and maximize your tax deductions. To learn more, go to reienergy.com.